Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 30, and we are talking about Words of Radiance, not Rhythm of War, Words of Radiance. And we're doing chapters 22 through 25 this week. What were how are you guys doing, first of all? We can start there. Elliot?
Doing pretty good. We're starting to get through quite a chunk of Words of Radiance now, so I'm feeling good.
Paul?
We really are, I'm doing great. I've been encouraged by I guess the pace we've been going, We're really coming along. It feels like we're going faster than we did in The Way of Kings, maybe because it's more fast-paced material. But yeah, it feels like we're really got this train moving. So
it's also new material for the first portion for you this time, because last time it wasn't exactly your first time reading that first material, because I made you restart to do the podcast.
True. I had read about 12 or 14 chapters into The Way of Kings whenever we started. I don't know if everyone knew that or not, but I had read about that far when we started. Sorry to ruin anyone's immersion.
We've been lied to.
A little bit ahead at the start. Yeah. And so the beginning was a little boring for me because let's get this. I already know this happens, so. But now it's just all new stuff, so very exciting.
All right. Do you guys have 2 words to summarize episode 30, chapters 22 through 25?
Sure do. My 2 words this week are respect and clarity.
Okay.
Nice. My 2 words for this week are convoluted and skybreaker.
Convoluted and skybreaker. I knew you'd pick up on skybreaker, but we'll talk about that in a second. So, Elliot, you've taken this Knights Radiant quiz. So have you, Paul. Paul, you got Windrunner, if I remember correctly. And Elliot, you got Skybreaker, as I did as well, but I didn't take it that night that we were doing that. So, talk to me about Skybreaker and the mention that we get here.
Oh, there's nothing deep. I just got really excited that Skybreaker was mentioned, I believe, for the first time in the book series here. I may have missed it before because I may not have been looking for it, but ever since we took that quiz and I learned that I was a Skybreaker, I've been on the hunt for any clues about what that even means or what the Skybreakers were like, maybe what their powers are. And we get a mention of Skybreaker, although there's not a whole lot there. Syl just kind of accuses Kaladin of being a Skybreaker almost. She's like, well, you're not a Skybreaker. Why are you acting like this? And it's almost just kind of an offhand reference, but it got me excited enough to where I had to put it as one of my words, even though I don't have anything really to talk about it.
What's the other word there?
My other word is convoluted. That one I do have some things to tie into the chapters here. So a couple different things in this series of chapters made me think of the word convoluted, but it started with the assassination attempt on Elokar. And Kaladin even talks about this, how he says whoever this assassin was, he's a pretty stupid assassin. This was a very convoluted, complicated assassination attempt that had a very low likelihood of succeeding, which I want to talk about that in more detail when we get there. But also just the storyline at this point is getting fairly complicated, and not in a bad way. Convoluted kind of has maybe a negative connotation to it, but in kind of a positive way. I feel like the storyline is starting to get quite a few different elements kind of interwoven amongst them. We kind of ended last episode talking about the different characters that are all going to arrive someday at the Shattered Plains, and these chapters continue that even further, of kind of putting some of those pieces in place of this rather convoluted story that's going to somehow resolve itself eventually, I suppose.
You hope.
So convoluted. Yeah, true. I hope. Not necessarily in this book, but they will resolve themselves eventually.
All right, Paul, talk to me about your 2 words.
So my 2 words, the first of which is respect, and that's mostly for Kaladin, um, along with my second word, clarity. Primarily are for Kaladin because we start to see the conversation, or we have the conversation between Kaladin and Dalinar about Amaram, and it really exceeded my expectations. Uh, we really get to see Kaladin have a lot of respect for Dalinar, which we haven't really seen him respect someone like this before, I think,
Sure.
for the most part. Very, you know, patient and everything with it, at least externally. um, and so that was the main reason I chose that. Um, clarity also was for um, some of the other things. We kind of just get a general clarity about some other stuff, like things with Spren and the Parshendi and Stormform and things like that. We kind of start to see some more connections with stuff like that. So
Gotcha. We can talk about Kaladin here in a second. We'll talk about all 3 chapters that we'll talk about all together. But last week we talked about Shallan quite a bit. And we get one more Shallan chapter here, which we can start. Chapter 24. Shallan, it's right after the battle on the highway. It's not really a battle. It's more like a one band killing another band, basically. And Shallan has joined forces with this other caravan that they ran into. And the chapter is titled Tin, I believe. And it's in reference to this bodyguard lady that was in the caravan. And Shallan kind of gets to know, 1, the deserters, and 2, some of the people in the caravan here. So anyone want to pick up this chapter and talk about Shallan a little more?
yeah, I actually would love to. So Tin is kind of the first person to call Shallan out on. Shallan has very much been putting up a front for the most part. I mean, she is a, I guess, powerful light eyes woman, but she's been making a lot of promises she doesn't know how to fulfill. And Tin recognizes that and talks to her. She knows that there's something really important going on, but doesn't know fully what that is, and basically pulls her aside to talk about that, which is pretty cool. We got to see Shallan kind of think quick on her feet, and I have some more stuff to add to that, kind of about what was going on there. But I am curious to see what Eliot thought about that. I wasn't actually a big fan of Tin as a character. I don't fully know why. It just she seemed very like brash and like knows everything. I don't know if that's weird, but anyways.
Tin is interesting. She seems, after reading this chapter 24, I think Tin is more than she seemed to be at first. At first, we just thought she was a bodyguard. Shallan notes that it's a little odd that she's a light-eyed woman carrying a sword. Now we learn that apparently she has connections at the Shattered Plains, and she doesn't, give us any details about what those connections are. But she seems to be maybe more than she's claiming to be, or wanting people to think she is there. But yeah, I definitely don't trust her for sure.
She doesn't believe Shallan at all with any of it. So she assumes that Shallan is conning the deserters to get her to the Shattered Plains, and that's all she cares about. And then Shallan kind of responds with a lie that says, "Oh, I've got dirty secrets on Dalinar. That's why I'm really here. And I want to get to the Shattered Plains because of that." And she doesn't reveal exactly who Shallan is. I don't think she reveals that she's betrothed to Adolin to Tin. So Tin doesn't really know who Shalon Davar is. Like, that name doesn't give her anything.
Yeah, it's an interesting interaction there between Tin and Shalon, because Tin shares that, hey, I did a little checking on you. She explains that she has a span read and she was able to contact someone and say, hey, can you do a little background check on Shalon Davar? Pretty much is kind of how that seemed to go down. And so she knows that Shalon Davar is a person and kind of who she is. She doesn't seem to maybe trust that she is who she's saying she is, or maybe she's just confused of, why are you so far away from home kind of thing. But Shalon realizes that kind of she hasn't really been intentionally trying to pull off a con here, but she kind of realizes halfway through, well, maybe I could be. And so she kind of slips into this, like you said, dropping this lie about knowing something about Dalinar to try and con the con woman, which I will say, in most stories I've read or watched, trying to con the con man doesn't usually go very well. So
Right.
we'll see how it goes this time.
We're slipping in more into those manipulations that we were talking about last episode. When the
Yes.
opportunity presents itself, she kind of just goes with it and says, "Oh yeah, I'm here to trick the Kolins and blackmail them." That's not why she's here.
I did. I actually think Shalon. Not saying this is good, but I think she did a good job of deceiving, of tricking here.
She's
Be-
getting better at it.
because she did do. So Tin was like, "All right, I've caught you. I know you're like deceiving all these men and stuff. Essentially, like, let me know what's going on." And so she kind of gives her that in a like real way, and I think Tin buys it. So
Right.
I think she did like a really good job there, and the fact it is like a big deal, like I guess blackmailing Dalinar Kholin is like a big deal that like it had to be something noteworthy enough of to justify the whole situation that's going on, which is something that would not be taken lightly, like something with Dalinar Kholin. So I actually thought it was kind of cool. Not that it was good that she lied to Tin. Definitely not saying that, but she didn't want to tell Tin the whole real story, which is kind of understandable. Um, so she kind of just went with that, and I don't think Tin kept up with that or saw through that.
Shalon definitely thought quickly on her feet, which was, yeah, impressive to see Shalon do that. She's kind of stumbled sometimes before, and she didn't really this time. So she's getting better. She's learning, and as far as we know, she didn't really use any like Stormlight or illumination abilities to do this one. In the past, she's used kind of that illusion she can create to assist in her manipulation, inspiration, deception, however you want to call it. This time, it seems to be just kind of some pure wit and skill here. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure this is the greatest idea to try and con the con, but she's at least doing it rather well so far. I will say that Shalon is really hanging everything on her betrothal with Adolin working out.
Right.
She is banking really heavily on that happening. If that falls through, she's going to have a lot of people very angry at her.
She'll have a whole troop of deserters who are expecting to get paid and redeemed for deserting, and she has nothing.
Yep. But
True, and
if it goes through, then maybe it all works out perfectly.
that's true. If it does work out perfectly, then something else really bad is going to happen. But my guess is that it's not going to work out perfectly. Maybe it'll work out, but not perfectly. Um, we had talked about this before, and I wanted to bring it back up about whoever Shalon meets once they get to the Shattered Plains is going to be very impactful. especially because I believe it was this chapter, maybe the one right before the most recent Shalon chapter. She talks about Sadius being a
Yes.
very knowledgeable man, very, light eyes, smart guy, just a good guy. And I can't help but, I couldn't help but imagine, what if Shalon goes and Sadius kind of like takes her under his wing somehow?
Right.
And then that just causes such a host of problems. Like anything that she would want to happen at the Shattered Plains would be ruined if she's like there with Sadius.
Right. There's
So,
there's a politics war happening on the Shattered Plains right now. Elokar and Dalinar versus Sadius and the other high princes, and she has no idea. So as soon as when she walks in here, if she meets the wrong people and
mm,
joins forces, like all the Alethi are on the same side, right? So she walks in with Sadius, and then yeah,
it's over. Like Sadius could easily, give her the money to pay these people back, be like, hey, come work with me, and then it's just over for her. There's definitely
Or
no like marriage with Adolin, I imagine, if she's like working close with Sadius. It just ruins everything. So
or it could get even worse than that. Let's say she goes and meets Sadius first. Sadius learns that she's Adolin's betrothed, decides to just take her captive or force her to stay, use her as bait or um, as a hostage. I mean, there's a lot of ways this could go down, all hinging on who is Shalon gonna encounter first when she finally gets to where she's going.
if she accidentally mentions to the wrong people that Yasna's dead because nobody else knows that yet, and
Yeah.
then they use that as leverage.
I will say what I think is going to happen is that at the end of these episodes in chapter 25, we see that Dalinar is getting ready to send Kaladin out on patrols outside of the camps. So my guess is that Kaladin's going to be the one to encounter her first. He's going to be out on patrol, maybe his first patrol with his bridgemen outside the camp, and they're going to come across the merchant caravan that where Shalon is. That's what I think is going to happen. I think that's what we're setting up for, which that's probably one of the better scenarios for Shalon here, but maybe not the best because we've noted that Syl and Pattern are perhaps set up to be enemies, so that might not go down so smoothly, but better than marching into Sadius's camp.
Cal-
I
Kaladin also doesn't have the best reputation with meeting light eyes randomly, so
True. Very true.
that is that is likely to happen. I definitely anything can happen at this point. That's what I'm looking forward to seeing at the moment. Is who is she gonna meet? How's like all gonna go down when she gets to the Shattered Plains? I am actually erring on the side. I'm not a pessimistic person, but I think she's either gonna meet Sadius or someone else that we just don't even know is there. Like I don't know, Wit is gonna be there somehow or something. Like I think it might just be like some wild card character. But we'll see.
Well, there's something I thought of that might play into that, Paul. I was thinking about Tin and who she might be connected to. What if she's connected to Sadius's wife's ring of spies? Remember when we had that one brief glimpse of Sadius's perspective? We learned that his wife runs like a system of spies. Maybe Tin is part of that system of spies, and so perhaps that could play into your thoughts there of her getting sucked into Sadius's world. That could be a possibility.
Very true. Do you have any predictions on who Shalon is going to meet, Trevor?
I think she's going to get killed by the Parshendi and not make it.
Whoa.
Whoa, spoilers. Come on, Trevor. Not cool.
Sorry.
We're gonna soundbite that one and bring it back later.
Sometimes I just slip
Yeah.
and accidentally say what's coming. My apologies. Anything else from this Shalon chapter? She gets to know her men a little bit. She gets to know Tin. There isn't too much to this chapter.
Now we should probably move on to talk about Kaladin.
All right, we can do that. So, backing up to chapter 22, Kaladin is guarding the Kolin family. They're all kind of in the same suite, if you will. They're all within like the same room-ish, so he can guard them all at the same time. And while they're sitting in here, he sees during the high storm, excuse me. And while they're sitting in here, he sees a red glow on the shutters of the window. Anyone want to pick this up? It's kind of where it starts here.
I have questions about this for sure. He sees a reddish glow outside, and then he feels like there's eyes watching him, or feels like there's something watching him. And I'm not sure what's outside in the storm, in the high storm, but I maybe have some guesses. Perhaps it's the storm spren that we've seen mentioned before. I think they've even been described as looking like red lightning. These storm spren. I think Syl sees them. Maybe some other people do as well. It could be the Stormfather. Stormfather could be back. Kaladin's had an interaction with him before in the past. My other more crazy thought is maybe it's the Parshendian storm form. In the interlude we saw, Eshonai was going to go out into the next high storm and try and achieve storm form. If our timelines are lining up here, this is the next high storm we've seen since that, I think. Mm-hmm. So this would theoretically be the storm that she's going out into to try and achieve storm form. Is that what this is? Is Kaladin kind of feeling the presence of Eshonai, the Parshendi, in storm form? Maybe that might be a stretch, but those are all my possible thoughts here.
You're right. This is the next high storm, and if we don't know for sure, but if the interludes are chronological, then this would be the high storm that Eshonai's trying to achieve storm form. So whatever that means for this reddish glow that Kaladin sees, but Narok is not close to the war camps, as far like that they're not very close. So why he would see the glow from that far away, I don't know. If that's what's happening.
Yeah, that does seem a little bit far-fetched there, so perhaps not. But anyway, ominous for sure.
One of the best things about this part for me is Adolin during this high storm is perusing a magazine of men's fashion, even though he's not allowed to wear anything but his uniform according to the codes. And Kaladin is like, seriously, dude, you're spending a high storm looking at a men's fashion, and Adolin's annoyed at him. He's like, why are you here? It's a great little exchange.
It was.
To kind of go off of that, like I thought that was a really like funny moment too. But just kind of in general with Kaladin and Adolin, they don't really like each other, but I think they're going to become like super close in the future. Just it seems like a brotherly distaste,
right?
You know, like stop, like you're annoying, but like I bet I just they seem very similar for the most part. They have very stark differences, but they also have very stark similarities, and so I think like as we develop throughout the books, I think they're going to become super close, and for sure,
I think that could be a good guess. I think we're already starting to move a bit from like actual conflict into like the banter realm. I think they're they're starting to just heckle each other, just to heckle each other. Kind of at this point, it's already moving into a where we're entering frenemies zone already,
Right.
instead of just arch nemesis.
They got their testosterone kick out of punching each other a little bit, and now they're
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. So definitely the most notable thing I think from this chapter is um we do start to see Kaladin talk with Dalinar about Amaram, which is what we've kind of been waiting for a while.
Right.
My biggest fear was that this wouldn't happen, and Kaladin would just kind of suppress that. But he does go and talk, and I really, really liked this. I was honestly very proud of Kaladin. Even though he didn't hear really what he wanted to, he kind of knew that would happen because going up to Dalinar and being like, "Hey, like basically your best friend is horrible." He's not going to be like, "Oh, you're right," like right out of the gate.
Right.
Um, but I was really impressed with how like respectful Kaladin was. If you look at the dialogue there, it's very like proper and didn't seem even like the Kaladin we've seen so far. It looked like a different Kaladin, which I actually really liked and felt like that was some good growth. Afterwards, he was good old Kaladin, kind of like doubting, upset about it, and Sill's like, "What? Like, chill out again." And he's like, "Yeah, I know." But I really liked that. It was exactly how I wanted it to go, which I didn't expect. I expected it to be more heated, I guess.
Right. One thing I will say about Brandon Sanderson's writing is both Kaladin and Dalinar approach this scene as you would expect them to. The characters that have been established here, Kaladin is doing his best to maintain composure and present this in the right light, and Dalinar doesn't believe him. But if this was an actual conversation in the real world, Dalinar wouldn't believe him. He would need more evidence. He would need to look into this further. And so this is a very realistic conversation that's happening here of, I need to talk to you about this, even though you won't believe me, even though you're going to need more research that I don't have. All I have is my word. And Dalinar says, all right, you've said your bit. I'm going to look into this. But he doesn't believe him yet. And that's how it probably would go down if both of these characters were real.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is exactly how I hoped this conversation was going to go. And like you said, Paul, simply because of that, it's not what I was expecting the way it was going to go. I was expecting there was going to be more tension and conflict, and for Kaladin to step up and bring this up in such a reasonable way. I Paul, you said it well too. I'm proud of Kaladin for this. I think this is exactly what he needed to do. He didn't jump in and start throwing wild, accusations and demanding that Dalinar go arrest Amaram. He just kind of stood up and gave his piece and told his story, and he wasn't super satisfied with the result, but Syl even kind of, I think, chimes in and says, hey, that went pretty well, man. You should accept that. And yeah, I think Kaladin's probably in the best situation he could be in at this point, because now Amaram can't bring the story up first and try and pin it on Kaladin. Kaladin's already got Dalinar's ear in this, so if Dalinar is going to be swayed to this, I think this is setting him up for the best chance of that.
And if at some point Kaladin loses his temper and starts beating the crap out of Amaram, at least Dalinar's going to understand why.
Right. Yep. But yeah, despite that coming up in the first chapter of this episode, it doesn't seem to go too far yet, even in the rest of the chapters we get here. What is Dalinar exactly going to do about this? He mentions that he's going to talk to Amaram about this. I'm curious to see how that's going to actually go, if Dalinar's actually going to take action here, or if he's just going to kind of maybe keep this in the back of his mind. We'll see where it goes.
Well, speaking of keeping in the back of his mind, at the end of chapter 25, there's just this offhand comment of Dalinar and Amaram are having a casual conversation as friends. So I don't know how seriously Dalinar took this, or if he's just not discussing it with Amaram yet and he's going to look into it himself.
True.
Also, on another note of things in the back of your mind, I want to talk briefly about Shen at the end of our chapter here, because that's a character who's kind of been in the back of my mind. Haven't really thought about him much lately, but we kind of had like a sad Shen moment at the end. It was kind of like, oh, he was like, he talks like, is this the first time we've really heard him speak? Also, so it's the Parshendi bridgeman, and he asked
Definitely
Kaladin,
more than just like one word, I think.
Right.
Yeah, pretty much. So he asked Kaladin, am I part of Bridge 4? He was like, where's my spear? I thought I was part of Bridge 4. I guess he refers to himself as the slave of Bridge 4. And it was kind of really sad. I felt really bad for him. I also felt bad for Kaladin, because what do you do?
Right.
You can't be like, oh, my bad, here's your spear. You can't entirely do that, because people see a Parshendi or Parshman without a spear, with a spear, and everyone would probably lose their mind.
Right.
So,
and even more than that, we know now that the Parshendi do have spies amongst the Alethi. We know that they can take forms that look similar to Parshmen. So in the back of my mind is Shen perhaps a Parshendi spy, which doesn't even enter into Kaladin's thought on this. He's just thinking about it as more of like cultural norms of, well, I can't make a Parshman a soldier. I'm sitting here thinking, what are the implications what are the implications if he starts to trust Shen more? Maybe Shen learns just exactly what Kaladin is capable of, and maybe could get that information back to the Parshendi. That could be bad.
that's true. I didn't think about that.
Just to recall, in the epigraphs, we've seen Navani's journal, and it's at some later date. And in the epigraph, Navani was like, and of course we should have expected the Parshendi to have spies in our camp. And that's how we've learned that the Parshendi have spies in the war camp. And normal Parshmen, like you're saying, don't say anything more than one or two words and don't seem to have the cognitive ability to say more than one or two words. And here R'lyeh is suddenly having a full conversation with Kaladin.
And another reason why I think this could very easily work out is so Kaladin cannot give Shen a spear, but Kaladin cares a lot for his men, and I think he's going to try and do something to, I guess, show his appreciation and show that he cares about him in some other form, and that might come in the form of some valuable information that a Parshendi spy could kind of use could come back to bite Kaladin. And I think that would be a very sad way for Kaladin to kind of get hurt, because if there's one thing that he's like passionate about, it's kind of like caring for his men, I guess, like leading them in a good way. And I think for that to come back and bite him would be really sad. I don't know if that'll happen, but I could definitely see that. Seeing that become a reality.
Jumping into chapter 23, the title of this chapter is Assassin. And I remember on my first read, I was like, oh shoot, here we go. Szeth's here.
Szeth.
Elhokar's gonna die. No, that's not the case.
That's exactly what I thought too.
Szeth might be involved, and we do figure out here in a little bit that there is a Shardblade involved, so it could be Szeth. But as we've established, everyone and their mother has a Shardblade apparently, so this could be anyone. Although Dalinar and Kaladin do say that narrows down their suspects quite a bit, that they had access to a shard blade. So, any thoughts on this assassin chapter?
I do agree that I don't think this is Zeth. I think that if this was Zeth, he's not my prime suspect at this point. He would just come in, Stormlight blazing, shard blade out, mow down all the guards, kill a few shard bearers, take out Elhokar or Dalinar, since we know Dalinar's his target.
Right.
For him to try something so sneaky and convoluted, I don't think that's Zeth's MO. So unless he's under like specific instructions to do it as sneaky as possible, I don't think it's him. I don't think that gets me very much closer to who I do think it is, but I don't think it's Zeth.
The first words that we've read in the Stormlight Archive is Zeth wore white on the day he was to kill a king. He doesn't care if people. In fact, he's been told to make a scene of it when he does it. And at the end of The Way of Kings, we figure out that Taravangian is the one behind Zeth, and he tells him, "You need to go kill Dalinar, and it must be done brutally." So this probably isn't Zeth.
I have two questions / thoughts on this. First of all, so we know it's Taravangian, right, is the one who is controlling Zeth.
Correct.
Does Taravangian know like what's going on over here? Like, does he kind of know that? I don't know how widespread this news might be. Would Taravangian know that Sadeas and Dalinar are kind of enemies and like any of the stuff going on? That's probably an answer that probably don't have. I don't know for sure about that. I don't remember how far it is from their places and stuff, but
you do have a map next to you, but Kharbranth and the Shattered Plains aren't necessarily that close. However, span reads are a thing. So the dynamics of the Shattered Plains, everybody is paying attention to, because Alethkar is kind of the political center of Roshar at the moment. So people pay attention to the politics and the dynamics of the Shattered Plains. So you would assume Taravangian, being the king of Kharbranth, he would know kind of what's going on here.
Okay. The reason I was curious about that, and yes, I do have a map, but you said that, and so now I'm not going to look. And so Zeth was sent to kill Dalinar, and I didn't remember any of the specifics, but just because it wasn't guns a-blazing, I didn't like rule Zeth out there. I also don't think this is Zeth that we've seen with the Shardblade here. However, I don't want to say it's him, but I think there's someone else who has a Shardblade that we don't have confirmed yet, and I think that is Moash.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember exactly where it is. I think it might be in our last chapter, but it very much hints to it. It hints that Moash is way better than everyone else at stuff. And I don't remember the exact quote, but it definitely alludes to him, like, that he might have a shard blade.
So
and
here's
now that I'm under the assumption that everyone and their mother has a shard blade, why not Moash has a shard blade too?
So here's a couple facts to back up or dissuade you either way. Kaladin and Dalinar were trying to figure out who was out on the balcony after the high storm, because the damage that was done to the balcony, if it had been before the high storm, the balcony would have just been ripped away by the high storm. So it had to be after the high storm. In chapter 25, somebody mentions to Kaladin, "Oh, Moash was the guard out on that balcony." And you're right that Moash has been described in the past that He's the most capable of the bridgemen. He's the most like Kaladin, if you will, that he knows how to handle a spear, that type of thing. He also is the one that hates Light Eyes the most with Kaladin. Whenever Kaladin is there to bad talk Light Eyes, Moash is right there with him. It's like, yeah, I hate them just as much as you, that type of thing. However, something to keep in mind here, if you have a shard blade, your eyes turn light, like a Light Eyes.
That was my first.
And
That was my first thought. That's my first thought. I'm so I don't know if you have more, but we'll get back to that. But I thought about that, and my question with that was: so we know that Kaladin killed a shard bearer, right? I know killing a shard bearer is not what makes your eyes light. It's having the shard blade, I guess.
correct.
But I thought Kaladin had the shard blade for a period of time. Did he not ever have it? Because as far as I know, his eyes never became light. I thought that was like a rumor.
If
almost.
yes, it's like it's a legend. But if you remember back in the Amaram chapters in the Way of Kings, Kaladin doesn't touch the sword, and the bearer that comes in with Amaram when Amaram kills Kaladin's men and Amaram confronts him about the sword, he is specifically holding it like in cloth so he doesn't bond the blade, because if you hold a shard blade, you bond it, and the legends say that your eyes turn light. So if that is true, Moash would have to have light eyes if he had a shard blade.
If that legend is true. I'm about 50-50 on this. I think it's possible. I still think it's very possible that Moash has a shard blade. I don't necessarily know he has. Like, he's the one doing this, which would make sense. If he has the shard blade, he probably is the one doing this, if it's not Zeth. But yeah, it's very possible that he's just doesn't have a shard blade, and that's the end of it. But it did get me thinking.
This is an intriguing theory. You've got me thinking too, Paul, because I agree. There's a little bit of suspicion on Moash here, just based on it seems like he might be the only person who was out on the balcony after the high storm right before this happened. I hadn't even considered that Moash might have a shard blade, but Paul, you bring up some interesting points about him being better than the rest of the folks at stuff that he's doing. He's also shown a rather unnatural interest in shard bearers. If you remember back at the end of Way of Kings, when Kaladin reveals that he has this power, Moash at least once, maybe multiple times, is kind of pushing him like, "Hey, can you teach me this? Can you show me how to do this? And can I learn this?" He seems like he's very interested in that. So that does get me wondering there. But the light eyes thing, that seems to be, I don't know.
I'm wishy-washy on the light eyes thing. I don't know. We just don't know. We haven't seen a dark eyes with a shard blade, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, jumping ahead a little bit, there's a few things we need to come back and mention. But as far as like narrowing down the suspects for who might have done this assassination attempt, I mean, Moash is got to be on that list, although it seems very unlikely that he has a shard blade. I mean, who else is there that could even have done this? I mean, we know Dalinar has a shard blade. We know Adolin has a shard blade. We know Renarin has a shard blade. None of them strike me as real suspects here. I will say that Elokar has been known in the past to fake an assassination attempt on himself. So maybe not too far-fetched that he's doing that again, although the motive for that seems to be a little bit gone, and that he seems to have convinced everyone. His motive for the first time around was to convince everyone that assassination attempts on him were real. They needed to worry about it. Well, he's got everyone convinced of that now. He doesn't really need to do that again, but he still seems to be acting like a bit of a baby. So Maybe he's doing it just to get attention. I don't know. I don't really have a good suspect at this point. Sadeas has the motive for sure, right? The question is, could he have gotten to that railing in the time period that he had? Kaladin seems convinced that this had to have happened after the high storm, for the high storm would have knocked the railing down then. So it had to happen in the relatively short time, a couple of hours between the high storm is gone to when the king goes out onto the railing to do his thinking or whatever. So for Sadeas to sneak in there in that time frame seems a little unlikely, but Sadeas would definitely do something like that if he had the opportunity. So he's not off the list. I will say that this whole assassination attempt was the primary reason I picked convoluted as my word. And Kaladin even he talks about this. He as he and Dalinar are trying to process this, he's like, why so complicated? And Dalinar kind of explains that, well, maybe it's not. Maybe they're intentionally trying to not be confrontational about it. Maybe they're either afraid of the confrontation or they're trying to make it as sneaky as possible. And I'm kind of like Kaladin at first to write that off as, well, that's kind of silly and inept. Why not just poison the guy? But we've seen overly complicated assassination attempts before. Cabsol was sent, or assuming he was sent, to assassinate Yasna. And the method he comes up with is to repeatedly feed Shallan poisoned bread with an antidote in the jam, hoping that one of those times Yasna is going to take a bite of bread and die.
Right.
Like, if you're looking for overly convoluted assassination attempts, there's a great example. And so we've seen Cabsol, who we think at this point was a Ghost Blood, use that type of method before. Could this be Ghost Bloods again, trying to pull off a rather complicated assassination attempt?
We do know that there are just other shard bearers out there, at least from the interlude that we had most recently. I forgot the name, but the older man who was chased down by a shard bearer.
Oh yeah,
Iam.
Yes, Iam. It's possible. Like we thought about maybe that being part of the Ghost Bloods. Very, very well could be. So I would buy that.
Yeah, possible.
In chapter 25, it is titled Monsters, which, Elliot, you and I had a laugh about this before we hit record tonight. You, in a couple previous episodes, you picked monsters as one of your words to describe the summaries, and you used it to describe the flashback chapters, how Shallan, and from her young point of view, is talking about monsters. We don't really know who the monster is. And then when we finally get a chapter that's titled Monsters, it's about horses. And it's from Kaladin's perspective, and it's about horses. Anyone want to pick this up?
I do. I really want to pick this up. One thing, okay, I guess on a yeah, I thought it was very funny. I remember listening and hearing the title, chapter 25, Monsters, and I was like, oh shoot, what's gonna happen? and they're just learning to ride a horse. Like it was not anything remarkable. It looks like Elliot wrote on our outline, did Brain Sand have a bad experience with horses? And I was actually gonna say, I didn't write it down, but one of my thoughts as I was listening to this chapter was Brandon Sanderson like a horse girl, as the like stereotype goes, or was he like a big horse person growing up?
Right.
Like really into horses? And probably not, but I thought it was really funny. The reason I thought that, I don't know the quote, but it's his description of Kaladin seeing a Rashadium, and it is the most glowing, like enticed description I've ever seen. And another Rashadium are like beautiful horses, very large, elegant horses. But I thought it was like a love scene. Like like hearts over the eyes. Like the description was just so like loving and sweet, and I was like, wow, he really likes describing this horse like a lot. So yes, I thought that was
that
funny that you put that.
that is really funny because I was kind of leading the opposite way. I'm reading all of these thoughts that Kaladin is having of how he views these horses as like demon beasts, basically, that you'd only ride when you absolutely have to, and how just unearthly they are, and how terrifying they are. And I kind of wondered the other way of, is this Brandon Sanderson maybe writing in a little bit of his own fear of horses? I totally remember the scene though where he's describing the Rashadium, but now I'm kind of wondering if this has to be one or the other. Is Brandon Sanderson a horse lover, or is he terrified of horses?
Good question. Yeah, definitely in the questioning of the purpose of horses and trying to learn how to ride a horse, there's a definite distaste there. Uh, but maybe he likes them from afar. He thinks they're beautiful, but
Yeah,
doesn't want to ride one. You know.
there you go.
Um,
But yes, I found this entire chapter pretty humorous, just for its description and interaction with the horses.
yeah. I also love the part where Kaladin Stormlight like lashes
Yes.
himself to the saddle.
Right.
That was very funny.
My
That imagery, at least.
my entire or one of the highlights of this chapter for me is Kaladin's impression of horses. He thinks they look unnatural and weird because it's not like a crab. It doesn't have the crustacean things that he's used to, like an axe hound or the cremlings that he, is used to. It doesn't have a shell, so he's like, why does this creature exist?
That horse is just a bizarre kiddo.
He has the dialogue with the horse. He's like, look, I don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. Let's get this over with.
Exactly. Also, so one serious thought I had in this chapter was with that, I was kind of expecting like a movie moment where like the horse was just like, okay, and they just like trot off and that's the end of it. And I thought maybe, because we've talked about the Orders of the Knights Radiant and they all kind of have different powers. Some seem to overlap, but they have differences. And we've seen similarities between Zeth and Kaladin. And we kind of know there are similarities between Yasna and Shallan, but there were differences there. And we were wondering, is there a difference between Zeth and Kaladin? And I was wondering in this moment, I was like, can he like talk to animals like, and stuff? And then I feel like it was pretty evident that that's not the case. But my mind did go there pretty quick. I was like, oh my gosh, he's gonna like mind control this horse or like tame this horse or something, which would have been kind of cool in my opinion. But
It would not surprise me at all if one of the radiant abilities or surges of one of the different orders is some sort of, telepathic communication with animals or something like that. So yeah, I was kind of waiting for that moment too, but didn't come.
yeah.
One thing I picked out of this chapter actually wasn't necessarily to do with the horses. Well, it kind of was. Adolin tries to kind of goad Kaladin into going and riding the horse that he knows is going to buck him off. And
Right.
Kaladin takes the bait, but he kind of knowingly takes the bait. He takes it as more of a challenge. I'll take it. I mean, that's Kaladin that we've seen 100% of. If you put a challenge in front of him, he's got to do it. He's got to conquer it. And so Adolin even is kind of telling him as he sees him, trying to get on this crazy horse, dude, don't do it. I was just joking. And then after all that happens, Adolin actually comes up to Kaladin and says, thank you. And Kaladin's like, for what? He's like, for not telling my father that I put you up to that. And I laughed there, but then I kind of, that's a bit of a step for Adolin, I think, actually. For Adolin to come to Kaladin and basically apologize. He doesn't quite fully out, apologize, but to say, hey, thanks, man, for not getting me in trouble with my dad. This is another step, I think, of the Adolin and Kaladin bromance, starting to develop here. Of
Yeah.
he's reaching out a bit. I think this was a moment where they kind of maybe had a little bit of an understanding.
The Adolin and Kaladin romance is coined Kadolin on Twitter, just for your guys' future reference. So if
Good to
you're
know.
if you're referring to that couple, you can refer to them as Kadolin.
That's awesome.
I was trying to think of if you could say it the other way, like start with the A instead
Wouldn't
of
it
the
just
K.
wouldn't it just be
But it would
Adolin?
just be Adolin. Yes, that's exactly what I discovered. I was like, what do we do the other way? And I was like,
Adolin.
Adolin. Oh, yeah, that's just his name, Adolin. So, okay, Kadolin.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Cool friendship.
All right. Any closing thoughts for episode 30?
None here.
I'm really excited going forward. Nothing else, I guess, on these chapters we went over today. In all honesty, these were really great like very enjoyable chapters, but it wasn't anything like earth-shattering.
Sure.
I know that will be to come. That will come in the future. But it was very enjoyable. I'm really excited going forward to see, hopefully, when Zeth arrives, and also when Shallan arrives, who she's gonna meet. Those are kind of the two things on my mind going forward.
I feel like we have a lot of big events just kind of hovering over us right now. We know that we have these showdowns coming. We know that Zeth's going to come, Shallan's going to come. We know that something has to happen with Amaram. Like there's a lot that feels like it's hanging over our heads right now, but it doesn't seem like we're getting any closer to those actually resolving. So I too want to read really want to read more so that we can get to those events.
They're coming. Don't worry. They're coming. All right. We can call it there. If you will allow me. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Eliot.
You're actually not allowed, but just this once, I guess. I'll allow it. Of
Farewell
course,
for
though,
now.
I enjoyed it.